Hey, what's up guys? This is Benji Bruce with SpeakingLifestyle.com, and in this video I'm going to show you some really cool public speaking tips that you can use just to make your presentations a million times better. Now, the first one is actually a pattern interrupt, and a pattern interrupt is basically so different, it just pimp slaps the mind.
Shut up! That was amazing!
I mean, it's something that you do that people aren't used to, and so it kind of just shocks the mind, and people literally just pay attention. It can be a simple pattern interrupt like telling everyone to stand up, or it can be something crazy like you just trip and you fall. Of course, you don't want to trip and fall unless you have a reason to, but a pattern interrupt literally just pimp slaps the mind to pay attention. The next one is just simply changing your language. For example, like when I said pimp slap, instead of just saying pattern interrupt, when you say like pimp slap the mind, people will pay attention. So when you say words like that, just by changing the words you use, instead of saying a professional word like, oh, we're gonna lose some money, you say, look, if you don't do this, you're gonna go broke. So when you use more powerful words, or even words that are kind of just funny, to where instead of just saying, hey, that wasn't really a great thing to do, you say like, that was just like a dumbass move. Well, maybe not dumbass, but when you say like, hey, that was a move that a dum-dum would do. Saying words like that actually makes people pay attention. So when you change your language, people are much more likely to pay attention based on the words that you're using. The next one is framing, and framing is basically when you just tell the mind what to look for, and by telling people what to look for, that's all that the mind sees. So when you frame something, you're essentially telling people why is what you're talking about important, and then because of that, they're much more likely to pay attention, especially when you tell them why it's important for them, rather than just saying, hey, just listen up and this is going to be some cool stuff. And then of course, there's the yes patterns. The yes patterns, you pretty much see this in every single politician that's out there. A yes pattern is when you get people to say yes, when you always get people to agree with you, and you say things that people can't necessarily disagree with. So it's kind of like saying, look, I believe that family is much more important than money. Not too many people are going to disagree with that. Or when you say like, look, I think that our education system needs to get better. When you say things like that, you're creating what's called a yes pattern, and you're essentially getting people to say like, yeah, that dude's right. And by doing that, you're much more persuasive, people like you more, everything from the stage. So create these yes patterns in your presentation. And then there's cliffhangers. Cliffhangers are really cool. In fact, I actually use cliffhangers in my show, to where I walk out on stage and I say, look, by the way, there's a box over there. I want you all to pay attention to that box. We're gonna use it in just a second, but not just yet. And then you kind of just go on to something else. A cliffhanger, all great shows have it. Breaking Bad had like a cliffhanger in every single episode, to where at the very end they kind of say like, look, this is gonna happen, and then they just stop and they just leave you hanging. And a cliffhanger, it literally gets the mind to pay attention, because the mind needs closure. So when you have these cliffhangers in your presentations, and you walk out on stage, you're like, look, by the way, make sure we're gonna use this board later on. Make sure I use this thing because I got to show you guys something really cool. When you use a cliffhanger, people pay attention to it. So use several cliffhangers in your presentation. And then there's simple language. A lot of people, they tend to get really technical, especially really like intellectual people. They get too technical. They get down in the details and say, look, the statistics are like this, and the words of the psychohedric whatever, and they use all these complicated words. Well, you want to use simple words. No matter what it is, what you're describing, the more simple, the better. In fact, smart people, when you're really smart, they try to use all these complicated words, but it's much smarter to use simple words so people actually understand what you're saying, rather than you just using complicated words to make you look smart. And then of course, it's all about your energy. You want to increase your energy, especially towards the end, which I'll talk about in a second, cliffhanger. But basically you want to increase your energy because the audience pays close attention to you as a speaker. So if you get on stage and you're kind of just like, so what I want to do, what I want to talk about is this, and if you're like that, then people aren't going to pay attention. So you want to increase your energy, because your audience actually feeds off your energy. So make sure your energy is above their energy, and then they'll rise up to where you are. And then a very interesting thing that you can actually do is just make the room cold. So whenever you get to a room, if the room is hot, it's kind of warm, then you kind of feel like, oh, I'm gonna go to sleep, whatever. But the more cold the room is, I mean, don't make it too cold, but if a room is cold, then people actually pay attention because they're like, oh man. I mean, you can kind of feel it, and it's like this little energy thing that just goes through your body when the room is kind of cold. So keep the room cold enough, not freezing obviously, but keep the room kind of cold because people will pay attention versus if it's warm, then people are just going to go to sleep. And then of course there's showmanship, the #1 thing in all public speaking presentation. It's all about the showmanship. So many people focus on the content. They're like, man, I got to make sure I'm saying good stuff. But it's all about the showmanship. I mean, think about it. People say content is king, and maybe content is king. But without a king, without his crown, without his throne, and without the robe and all that stuff, a king doesn't look like a king. So you need to make sure that your content looks king. Make sure it looks pimped out. Make sure it looks really cool. So when you get on stage, you might be talking about, if you're a motivational speaker, you might be kind of getting everyone hyped up and all that stuff. But unless you actually add some showmanship to it, people aren't going to really pay attention. I mean, why do you think Michael Jackson was so good? He didn't just come out there and just started singing. He came out there, started dancing, added some showmanship, got the glove and all that stuff. So it was more of the showmanship that he had rather than just the singing. So focus on the showmanship rather than just the content. And then about maybe halfway through your presentation, you actually want to change pace. One thing that I do in actually my shows and presentations is I actually change pace of the entire thing. So I'm sitting there talking, and out of nowhere, just bam, pure silence. And I get everyone to be really quiet because of a demonstration that I'm going to use. And it's this mind reading demonstration that looks pretty cool. But it goes from having a really good time to bam, just pure silence. And everyone's like, what's going on? And of course, everyone flips out at the end. But
how many times?
3.
When you change pace about halfway through your presentation, it just, once again, it has that pattern interrupt. It pimp slaps people just right in the, it puts on the baby powder and just pimp slaps people. So when you change the pace about halfway through, you're structuring your presentation so people are much more likely to pay attention. And then you can, of course, include a lot of, if you want to get people to take action, include urgency and scarcity. So if you want people to do something, people are much more likely to do it if you say, like, look, there's only 10 of these available, or look, this is only going to be available until tomorrow, or something like that. Apple actually does this really well with all their products. Whenever they come out with a new product, new iPhone, new iPad, whatever, they host the events and then they come out with a product, and technically they can actually produce a lot of these products. They can send them out to Best Buy, all these companies, and say, like, look, we'll give you guys a ton of products, make sure you never sell out. But they do the exact opposite. They actually give people a very little amount of products, especially with the iPhones. That way the phones or whatever product they're selling, it sells out within like a day or two max. It sells out, and then the next time you're thinking like, oh man, I need to hurry up and go to the store on the day of because they're gonna sell out like last time. So in order to get people to take action, if you include a lot of urgency and scarcity, people are much more likely to take action. And then of course, in order to end your presentation, you want to end on a really high note. One thing that I do in my presentation, I combine this inspiration with mind reading, with slam poetry, and it's this very powerful type of thing where practically by the end of the presentation, I'm practically yelling, and it gets a standing ovation every single time. And the reason is because I always end on a high note. When you end on high notes, people have this energy just coursing through them, and they feel your energy. Remember I talked about earlier about the energy that you have? They feel this energy, and they're like, dang, and then they just, bam, give you a standing ovation. So those are essentially some really cool public speaking tips that you can use to just become a better presenter in general. Remember, speakinglifestyle.com, where awesome just happens.